All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you!
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Hello and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa.
And we are joined by one of our number one fans, if not our actual number one fan, back for the second time. We've got Andy Chacon. Andy, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Not too bad. And tonight we are expanding our definition for our month of love. And we're going to get outside that idea of romantic love. And we're going to look at a familial love with our February movie. Tonight we are doing the movie Verónica, a Spanish film that was at one point touted as the scariest movie on Netflix, including a stat that I saw that piqued my interest in this. When it first came out, Netflix had a stat out that claimed that only 17% of people who started the movie finished it, which of course they automatically assumed meant that it was too scary, not just that they, fell asleep on the remote or didn't realize it wasn't in English or something like that. So we're going to be talking about Verónica. I'm doing my best with the name there.
I was going to say, your pronunciation is fantastic.
Thank you.
Better than what I could do. Verónica. Now you just have to say it like a telenovela star. Verónica.
There we go. So as we get started, I want to start off just real simple, just kind of thinking about the movie. What did you think about it? One thing that kind of stands out about this movie is it's so rare that the demonic possession and haunting type movies cross over. You tend to go one way or the other. This movie kind of does a little bit of both. So do you think it works? What do you think about the movie in total? Andy, you're the guest. We'll let you go first, man.
You know what? I like the movie. I mean, there's so many things to like about it, and there were other things that I didn't like about it. With regards to the haunting and the demonic possession, I mean, these are things that we've seen 1,000 times before, but it seems to me as if he took ideas from different places and he peppered it into the film, and he did it the right way. I mean, he filmed it the right way. It's not like he stole ideas. I mean, he's taken ideas from other movies, but he did them well, So as far as that goes, I mean, that's why I liked it, because it wasn't an outright I stole an idea or the way that I filmed. It's just that he did it well. So I didn't think that it was an amazing film. I didn't think it was a bad film either. The whole idea is 17% of the people who started watching it didn't finish it. I mean, I don't understand why, but I mean, it wasn't that scary. I mean, it's not like I was telling David before, like Jaws. I mean, you say the tagline for that movie. I mean, nobody wanted to go in the water after that,
right?
So, but that wasn't the case with this movie. I mean, it was. I'd hate to say it was your run-of-the-mill demonic possession film. To me, that's what it was. It started like one and it ended like one, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad.
Dave?
I think Andy's kind of right on the money there. This movie is, I think, unfortunately, a victim of its own marketing campaign.
Yes.
This idea that it is the scariest movie in X number of years, that so many people couldn't finish watching this movie. We hear about this every now and then.
Yeah.
Right. Something by something like The Exorcist, where people were throwing up in movie theaters, and then you watch The Exorcist, and sure, it's scary, but scariest movie of all time, I don't know. Right. So I think that my expectations were high going into this, and part of that is Netflix's fault.
Yes.
Part of that is the marketing of the film itself. You know, the way the studio marketed the movie, and I'm certain that there was a viral social media campaign that went along with that, where people were paid to say this thing is the scariest movie I've ever seen, because I can't imagine any horror aficionado saying this is the scariest movie I've ever seen. I had such a hard time watching it. I had to turn it off. It's a well-made movie. And we kind of talked a little bit about that when we talked about My Bloody Valentine last week. It's kind of just standard slasher fare, but the fact that it's so well made is what makes it kind of rise above the rest, right? And I think that this is one of those where it's a really well made demonic possession slash demonic haunting movie. Is it any better or worse than Amityville Horror or The Exorcism of Emily Rose? I don't know. I don't think so. But I think that unfortunately, you do have to compare a movie to itself, like we always say, and the marketing campaign is one of those things. And that was part of, I think, the letdown with this movie.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that when, and you know, it was I guess it was 4 years ago that this dropped, but when you come across something like that, obviously, as people who do this, that's something that's going to pique our interest, right? Like, yes, good, okay, yeah, something that'll still scare me. And you're right. That's, you know, you when you start with high expectations, you know, last week it was easy for me. I went into My Bloody Valentine last week not really expecting much. I was like, that's a slasher from 81, right? I've seen all of these. And so, you know, there was plenty of room for growth. Through no fault of the film itself, but perhaps its marketing campaign, like you said, there was a setup here for this film that was almost unattainable, right? Like, I knew there was no way I was going to turn it off. For fuck's sake, I made it through Mother a couple weeks ago, and I didn't turn that off. We may or may not get to that. I don't even know if that qualifies as a horror film. It's a something. But anyway, I was terrified through that movie, and I managed to make it through. So like, okay, there's no way that I'm going to turn this off. But that being said, yeah, it was a fun movie, right? Like, I enjoyed it. There's nothing brand new here. There's nothing here that Ouija 2 didn't juice for a little bit more. You know, like there are definitely some lines to be drawn between some gags and some of the things that happen in this movie to Ouija 2, and possibly because of budget, Ouija 2 really did squeeze those things a little harder. But there are some really great redeeming things about this movie that made it. It was still a good watch. It was just one of those things where you're right. Like we were set up to fail with this one. Yeah. And whether it's Paco Plaza's plan, or, you know, whoever released it, or whether it was just Netflix's thing, because if I remember correctly, this thing just kind of like came out of nowhere on Netflix back in 2017. Because I remember when it came out thinking I was going to watch it and then never getting around to it. But it wasn't the type of thing, you know, the idea of Netflix releasing trailers for something that's going to be a Netflix exclusive is still relatively new. And back in 2017, they weren't hyping things that were going to come out. Now, granted, they still drop things out of nowhere that become sensational. I don't think anybody had heard of Squid Game, but before the day it dropped, and it was an international sensation. But so this came out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden, the only thing that you were seeing about it was how scary it was. And yeah, it had some tense moments. It did have some good scares. It just wasn't anything amazing. But I did like it. I think that the story was told well. I think that this is one of those situations, and we're going to get to cast, a little while ago, but this is one where it's especially telling of how good Paco Plaza is, and he got such great acting jobs out of these children who carry the movie. Everybody played their part exactly the way they should have played it. there, like I said, there were a couple things about this movie that were such tropes that it was almost laughable. Then there's a couple things where you're kind of astonished at the fact that because there were children acting out these roles, they kind of took these cliches and twisted them. And you watch them change the idea of how this cliche should work right in front of you. Those things worked really, really well. So I did like it. But I agree with you guys. There's nothing spectacular here. There's nothing that hasn't been done in other films, either just as well or even better.
And I think that part of that may have to do with the actual narrative, with the story, the plot that's going on here. And now horror movies, I mean, no stranger to the, based on true events thing. And we are going to get to the real life story of what happened here. Right. But how does this interpretation of those events kind of lead this story into either familiar territory and that being a good thing or a bad thing? You mentioned one movie in particular that to me I immediately started thinking of when I saw this, which is Ouija Origin of Evil. Now of course you're up against Mike Flanagan and that's a losing fight every time. But that's a movie that I think uses the Ouija board as a great MacGuffin, to kind of just kickstart the story. Conjuring 2 is another one that uses that as a great MacGuffin to kind of get that, those horror, spiritual juices going. The Exorcist, speaking of Captain Howdy. So Daniel, right? How does this story work? Relative to other Ouija-based movies that have come out in either recent history in the past, and how does it work for this movie in particular?
So in this particular movie, they hook you immediately with this idea of a girl who just desperately wants one more talk with her dad. She just wants to communicate with her dad one more time. We find out that he passed away. Credit where credit's due. We talk about not wanting to be spoon-fed things. They realized that part of the exposition was, it was non sequitur. That didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. We just know that he's dead. She wants to talk to him. So we get this Ouija board. One thing that I really liked about it was, and it may have just been because it was filmed in Spain or whatever, but I liked that it wasn't like the Milton Bradley Hasbro Ouija board. Right. Yeah. It was very much just, I guess, like the Encyclopedia of the Occult, I believe is what the book that she was reading all the time was called. Yeah. And it was like a branded one from them, but it had a very cool look to it. And so that gave it something that you don't see a lot, in the fact that the Ouija board itself was unique looking. The story as it progressed, one thing I really liked, I did like the idea of, like you were never really sure if anybody else was seeing these demons and whatever it was, like there were people in the room when she was seeing them, but you also know that if you're in a room with someone who's terrified, even if you don't know why, that in itself is terrifying. And so you're never really sure if anyone else is seeing these things or how much of it is actually happening. So that part of the story carries very well. The idea of an older sibling becoming the parent because the parent is very busy. Now, one thing that I really liked about this, it's real easy to go the route of having a deadbeat parent. And so that's why the older sibling has to take on this role. But this was a mom who was just working herself to death because she had 4 children and was on her own. So it never, there was one point where she gets mad at the mom, but it was never like, oh, my mom's a drunk and that's why I've got to do this. So it avoided that trope.
Which it kind of seemed like that's where they were going at the beginning.
Yes, because she was still asleep as they were getting ready for school. And I thought the same thing. I was like, oh, here we go. Right. Yeah. Deadbeat parent, sister, da-da-da-da-da. But they did a good job with that. And it made the family element of the story even stronger. right? Because now you're looking at these two very strong women in matriarchal roles, even though one of them is just a big sister, just doing what they have to do to make sure their family survives. So I really liked all of that. You know, it's weird because we always have this conversation of whether the story supports the gags or if it's just there to get you from point A to point B. And on paper, like when you watch the movie, you're never lost as to what's going on in the story. And on paper, there's not much to it. But the story in this movie was a feel, right? There's not a lot of like narrative. There's a lot of things that happen, but you don't really watch any of the characters change and evolve. And that's not to discredit the movie. It's just, it's interesting to think about, like, when you look at the story of this movie, how there's not a lot there.
Right.
It's just kind of a sequence of events. So it's kind of weird, right? Because there's not necessarily a definitive like beginning, middle, and end here, like you would look for in a story. There's the beginning, end, and end, and then it's just a timeline, right? It's
and
more
really
so
the beginning is the end.
and really the beginning is the beginning is the end, right?
Tarantino
So
did.
Right.
so it's a timeline more so than it's a story, down to the fact that they literally timestamp the movie like every 27 minutes, right? Like they're like, and here we go, now it's Friday. So, and that is not to discredit the movie at all. It's just interesting to when you start to talk about the concept of story. And Dave, you're a literature teacher, you know, you like when you look at all these things, you're like, all right, like I when I taught second and third grade literature, and I know that you guys probably do this on a far more advanced level, we taught the hamburger thing, right? Where it's like, all right, here's the beginning, you introduce characters, that's the top bun, here's the middle, that's your plot, and then it's like, here's your end, conclusion, and all of that. And it's like,
some of the boys that we teach, Daniel.
And so it's interesting how this was all just kind of, like I said, it's a timeline more than it's a story.
It didn't have, you're absolutely right. And I think that the simplicity of it is what makes it a decent film, because there's not too many, there aren't many themes to it. I mean, it's a story that begins and it's a story that ends, and then we follow the main character throughout. And I think that helps, especially for anybody who's watching the film that doesn't speak Spanish. I mean, I was looking at the subtitles. I mean, I speak Spanish, but I mean, my thing is Spanish from Spain is I mean, I've been to Spain and it's tough to understand if you really listen to it. The dialect is very different, but it wasn't a problem in this film, because even if you read the subtitles, you would understand the story. You saw that she had a problem with her friends. You didn't really need the subtitles to understand that. You know, you understood that there was an issue with the mom working all the time, and that there was a problem there. You know, so that was a question that I had for you, Daniel. You don't speak Spanish. Did you find yourself reading the subtitles more, or did you feel like I get the film, I don't need to read the subtitles?
So I actually understand a good amount of Spanish. I did 6 years through middle and high school, did a couple weeks in Madrid my senior year, and so now, like I said, that was 20 years ago. That one hurt. And so it's so I still understand it, but now I have to do the thing where, like, if I'm trying to speak it, like I hear you say it, I know what you said. Now I've got to like think in English, translate it as best of my ability, and then say something that makes it sound like a jackass. But so I did read it, but I'm also very used to reading subtitles while I watch foreign films. I was telling Dave before we got started, there was a run in the early 2000s where I got really big into Asian horror. It was right around that boom. And so I did get very good at managing to follow story while not understanding nothing that they said and having to read it all. So it wasn't very distracting for me. But also there was a level of familiarity in what I was hearing while I was reading. Like I was connecting those dots.
Right.
I can only reiterate what you guys have said. I think that the story works well enough, and sometimes that's all you need. There were 2 points that I feel like were either undeveloped, and maybe it was the sort of thing that it just got, cut, it was left on the editing room floor and really wasn't explored, or just didn't end up making any sense, and they were like, fuck it. And it was that there were a couple of scenes with a big focus on the crucifix that lies in the hall.
Yes.
Right. In fact, it's one of the very first things that you see, the fact that the crucifix is on the floor. The girls go to a Catholic school, right? And Spain is notoriously Catholic, right?
Notoriously. That is really the only word to define how Catholic Spain is. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, any country that's willing to go to war for its religion, I mean, it is notoriously that religion.
Dave. No one suspected.
No one ever suspects the Spanish Inquisition. So, auto da fe. What's an auto da fe? Throw a Mel Brooks reference in there. The fact that Sister Death later says, well, this has nothing to do with religion. I thought that was pretty cool, because in every one of these movies, it's always about religion. Right. So it was an interesting thing where it's like, no, the devil, or, whatever doorway it is that you've opened up, doesn't give a fuck about your God. Right. It is here to fuck you up. Right. that's kind of what's going on here. Right. To misquote Hans and Franz. So the mixed messages that we're getting there were kind of weird, right? Like, would a belief in God have helped her, right? Now, of course, this is different in the real story, but that's one of those things where, for me, it was like we often talk about that gun introduced in Act 1 that must be used in Act 5, right? And I feel like that was one of those things that it's just like, we're gonna ignore that, right? The other thing that kind of struck me as like just this thing that was like, but why? Veronica asks Antonito to draw the Viking protection wards all over their walls, right? And he starts flipping through the pages and draws an invocation ward, right? The fuck was the point of that scene? Because we still get obviously this demonic being was already in the house. It was already there. We come to find out that it was already inside of her, right? And then what's the invocation then? Like, what's the implication there? The other thing that confused me about that, before you get to that, Daniel, is that at the end of the movie, the demon is coming inside her body, but it's already taken possession of her.
So, as far as the invocation, I think that that one I will defend a little bit. I think that part of that was if he flipped the pages and he started drawing the invocation runes, then maybe that's why they were still able to be attacked and the thing still had power, because if he was not drawing the correct runes, and maybe it didn't do anything to invoke, but it also then eliminated the idea of there being a symbol to protect them. So if he drew them incorrectly, you've now eliminated this idea of him creating a barrier around them with protection runes because he got distracted by the book and started drawing invocation runes. Yes, the demon has already been invoked, but now you're also not doing anything to protect your family from him. I think that's what I thought they were getting at with that. Not that he was further giving the demon permission, because you're right, as we come to find out, it's actually inside of her since the very beginning. But that now he didn't do anything to help protect them once they were pissing it off by trying to dismiss them.
There was one line in the film that I thought was a little confusing, when she told her mother, "We need you to come home because the evil doesn't seem to appear when you're there," and that was never answered. And I was,
Mhm.
why is that? What type of control does she have over the evil, if there is any, or does that make the evil more familiar? And that wasn't answered, and I was like left okay.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that
and
was
we do eventually find out that the demon has been inside of her essentially the whole time, and all these
Which
things
is a good
right,
twist.
right, which is
right,
a good twist.
And by the way, that moment where she realizes that Antonito is not in her arms on the way out of the
right,
hotel,
yeah,
that was like a, oh fuck, I didn't see that coming moment.
that was honestly like the scariest moment in the movie for me. Like when she just looks in the mirror and he's not there, because then I had that moment where I was like, well, now I don't know what's happening or what to
Right.
believe. And so that little bit did make the movie much scarier. It was a good twist to find out it was inside her the whole time. The reveal of that was great, where she walks into the room and you realize everything's backwards, right? Like the
right,
writing on her shirt, all the posters,
mhm,
everything's backwards. And they start
right,
flashing back to all this time she looked in the mirror. There was a minute where I almost drew that high tension parallel. But then when you think back on it, there was always just enough leeway that it makes sense that she could have done all of these things. Even though she ran away before the boy got burned, it would have been, she could have turned the water up. One thing I really loved about the story, and the way that it was presented, was the idea that Antonito, he could tell when she wasn't herself. Because because the very first thing that I thought was, well, wait a minute. If she is the one who's doing all these things, how come when the water burned him, he said it wasn't you? But then you think to when he's sitting in the closet with his fingers in his ears and he's refusing to acknowledge her. So it's like, oh, so he was saying it wasn't you because he could tell she wasn't in control when it happened. I think like that's kind of what I got for that. Some of those little elements
He
of it,
also
I thought
mentions
were
that
great.
it was his father that came to read to him.
Yes.
right.
So I don't know if he saw, maybe his father's spirit in her, in the same way that she saw her father's spirit in that demon,
I think we
right?
all saw the father's spirit
Right,
at one
that
point.
that
Right.
yeah,
So I don't know.
Dangling.
Yeah, just a little too much of that
Just
father spirit. Um, so
He's got spirit. Yes, he
you
do.
know you know what, when I saw that, when I see movies, and I always draw a parallel to other films, and I was watching that, and I'm there going, is that the Indian from The Doors? I mean,
my first thought when he appeared over there in the corner was, I was like, man, we cannot get away from these movies with fat naked dude dick.
Yeah, what the hell?
Like it just, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's terrifying, whatever. Like it just keeps showing up. But so there are, like I said, it's there are a lot of great moments here, but they're very much just stamps on a timeline as this progresses. What's really super interesting about this to me, and I ended up spending a lot of time reading this, is, like you said, we're not unfamiliar with the tag based
right,
on a true story, based on real life events, all of those things. This goes back forever, I'm sure. Like the earliest one, or the oldest one that I can think of seeing it on, is Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, it's one of the most famous ones.
Yeah. And so, while that's not unfamiliar, as people who watch a lot of these, we are also very aware of the fact that these ideas and these details are twisted to make a better movie. But what's really fascinating to me is the true story of what happened here. So in Spain, there was this girl who was having a seance with a Ouija board in the basement of her school. A nun interrupted it, and then shit went sideways for her. She then spent 6 months hallucinating, and having seizures, unwillingly, unknowingly self-harming, until she eventually died in
All
a
of this
hospital.
is shown in the movie, by the way. So it was
right.
kind of cool to see a lot of that real life story show up in there.
Right. And so it's the real story is more akin to something like what we see play out in the Exes of Emily Rose, where it's a slow burn into her ultimate demise. So when you think about what happened in the real story here and you start to compare it to the movie, how does that stack up? Does that make the movie any better or any worse, or does it affect it for you at all? Dave.
So Paco Plaza said that although the movie is based on the real events, he came right out and said that this is a a fictionalized version of those events. And if you look at the details of the case, now some of it is public record because it was in an actual police report, right? And that's part of the reason why this case gained so much attention, is because it's in an actual government record where police officers recorded something supernatural in their official report. So you look at that, you look at interviews that the family has given, the family of Estefania Guerrero Lázaro, and it's to me, the only thing that stands out is that police report. And,
Right.
I'm not exactly sure what to make of it, because otherwise, to me, this seems an awful lot like the way the Lutz family's experience in Amityville was portrayed. It starts off as one thing, ends up as another, and changes over time, and it turns into something of an urban legend, right? So I'm not exactly sure what to make of it. I don't know how much this influences the movie, whether it makes it a better movie. I know that it makes it may not necessarily make it a better movie, but it is for sure interesting. The fact that there is something that you can actually say this on an official record, something happened in this home. Because you can pass off what happened after Estefania's death as a family grieving, right? And her mother was, I don't think she was institutionalized, but she was diagnosed with a couple different mental disorders. So what she has to say about what occurred in the house, suddenly there's suspicion thrown around that. Because how much of that is shared reality and how much of that is her reality, right? So I either way, I think that it does lend to the movie truth a sense of credence that many based on true events movies don't have, right? Where you read that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based on true events, but only because Ed Gein kind of sort of influenced the creation of Leatherface, right? And otherwise there's no connection to any real killings that ever happened in Texas. And so I think that's kind of interesting. I don't know what to make of that police report, though.
Yeah, like that's the thing, right? The police report, like you said, it's an official government document that specifically states that what they have here is a situation of mystery and rarity, and that's fascinating to me, right? Like, I know we haven't talked about it on here, but in The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, you're looking at a situation where it was suddenly an onus of a lawyer to prove that the devil was real. And so when you can add those elements to something, that does add to it, I believe. But in this particular instance, I found myself wishing that it had been closer in timeline and in detail to what actually happened, because it seems to me that the idea of it taking I get the condensation of it, and this happens over 3 days, but the idea of watching someone unravel over the course of 6 months is scarier to me. The idea of even after their passing, after she died, the police did not become involved until a year after she died, because the family was still reporting shadowy figures walking around the house, inexplicable noises, things like that. That is actually a little bit scarier to me, while not necessarily as tense. And so I understand why you went for it here. You've got, an hour and a half to tell this movie. Some of the things that did make the cut into the movie are when she flips the mattresses, and there's that weird substance like on the floor and on the mattresses underneath. The police were completely unable to ever identify what they found underneath her mattress as anything. So, the parapsychology guy is like, oh, it's fucking ectoplasm, right? Yeah, exactly. The catch-all word. We all know that one. We love the Ghostbusters. And so, there's I will say they did a great job of being like, hey, here's this. It's kind of freaky, right? We're not going to spend a lot of time explaining it because you don't need that. So that part worked out real well when she flips the mattresses in the movie. And they did a great job of then showing you the crime scene photos that from real life later on that you realize were painstakingly recreated in this movie, like down to the types of candles that they used for the seance. So
it was difficult to tell one from the other.
Yeah,
it really was. One of the things that you're talking about with regards to the police report that I see, I mean, look, the story was corroborated. I mean, there were several witnesses to this. It's sort of like you go outside and you're in your backyard, you see something strange in the sky, and you know what? You call up your buddy, hey, did you see that? Yeah, I saw that. Now you got a story, because it's not just one point of view. It's two different people who saw the same thing, and I think that's what makes this a story. That's why I think it could become a story, because there are a lot of different angles that you have this story coming in on. And so now you could actually make this movie, as compared to, no, it was just one person, it's one person's idea, and that wasn't the case here. So I think the corroboration with that, and the witnesses and everything that we've seen, especially what you're talking about, the painstaking down to a T, the way that things are pictured, the way at the end of the film when they show you the images of the home and what they did in the film, I couldn't tell them apart. So it was as if there was a lot of different people who had seen this from many different angles, that experienced this whole thing, that made it a story. It made the story come to life. It wasn't just one idea. It was a lot of different eyes on this that made this a good story.
Yeah. And that idea of there being 2 points of view, or multiple points of view, is also really great, because the Conjuring movies, like I referenced, they always throw that around, because the Warrens are real people, and these are all loosely based on cases that they dealt with. But the point of view of a married couple, does that count as 2 points of view?
No,
probably not, right?
No.
So, but now you've just got a bunch of cops that are working together, and so you're right. There is another level of credence to that. So there are little bits of it. Oh, like one thing I read that said that when the police showed up, the family kept her room exactly the same after she died. When the police showed up, her room apparently was covered in posters, like it was in the movie, but there were like claw marks in the posters. Yeah, those could be attributed to a lot of different things, especially a girl who's hallucinating and having seizures. But also, yeah, that's an interesting little detail that's added in there, that you didn't have time to toss in there when you put this on a 3-day timeline. And so I think there are certain elements of it that were taken out and done very, very well. I also think there are some things from the true story that maybe this movie could have benefited from. One thing that I forgot to mention back when we were talking about the story is you mentioned MacGuffins. I kept waiting for the fact that there was a solar eclipse at the beginning of the movie to mean anything.
Yeah, they mentioned human sacrifice.
Yeah, there's all this effort put into talking about the solar eclipse, and then it's like, okay, no, they're doing the seance now. Forget about the solar eclipse, and it's like, why did I get a history lesson in solar eclipses?
I don't. To me, it seemed like the solar eclipse was the mode to make this happen because they were
Yeah.
messing with the Ouija board at the same time that the solar eclipse. I mean, the great scene that he directed, great. All these kids standing there with these things on their eyes. It just like almost looked surreal, you know.
Yeah.
And then Sister Death without it.
Yeah,
You know,
without
it was
it,
very
yeah.
cool.
I gotta say that's my favorite character in the film. You know,
She was my favorite as well.
when she stood in the window and Veronica looked up at her and she just stood there, that was freaky in and of itself. And I thought that it was going to be an issue when you brought her into the story and you had her have a conversation. No, that was great.
It was,
it was absolutely great, and I'm happy that they did that. I was a little nervous when I saw her. Oh, great! They took the spooky old woman from the window and they brought her in, you know. And I was thinking, oh, they just screwed it up, but nah, it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect.
The one other thing about the real story that plays into what you were saying, Dave, about, you know, after a year, after multiple years, you know, we always, so often on this podcast, we talk about the yes and factor, and sometimes it plays directly into the movie. But in this idea, the yes and factor, this being an urban legend, you know, as I kept reading about this real story last night. Like all of a sudden at one point there became this idea that like when the nun broke up their seance, the Ouija board broke and like this mysterious like white smoke rose from the Ouija board and she inhaled it. And I was like, see, now we're in urban legend territory, right? Like now we're starting to cross a couple borders that are making this less believable. So kudos for leaving that stuff out.
And what's weird to me is that I don't know. I feel like they either needed to lean more into the true story aspect of it or leave more of the true story aspect of it out, and make this more of an original movie, because the whole like coming of age sub theme that was going on there was really interesting, and I really liked that scene where you know, her sisters and her brother are eating her alive, and her mother comes and stands over her, and then her shadow comes, and it's her shadow that brings about her first period, right? Bringing her into adulthood just after having that fight with her mother, where her mother tells her that she needs to grow up, right? And it was foreshadowed at the beginning of the movie where the nun tells her, what do you mean you haven't had, you know, your first menstruation yet? You know, so it's like, you know, this growing up is part of what she has to do because she feels she's already done it, so her body is starting to catch up with that. That's a great thing that's going on there that's largely unexplored, you know. So like if you leave some of the, okay, we have to get these aspects of the story right, if you leave that aside and focus on really developing this interesting story, you have a better story. And if you just say fuck it with that, you know, new original story and just try to do the real story, man, you got a really great real story going on there. So I think like that inability to commit to either kind of left it in this limbo state, because there was a lot of potential there for either.
It's the cover song theory, right? You can go two ways to make a great cover song. You can take the lyrics of a song and create something that sounds like your band made it, or you can take your band and recreate that song. A great cover song can be made in either one of those realms. But when you just dip your toes in both of those ponds and you just end up sounding like a band doing this song at a bar, that's when a cover song is no good. You've got to commit to either being the original or being original. Like when you toe that line in between those two, that's when you end up with a shitty cover.
Yeah, agreed. I think one of the things that definitely worked here, and helped tell this story, you know, pimples and bruises and all, is the cast, and the fact that we had a largely child cast, right? You often hear that you don't ever want to work with children or animals as a film director, right? And Paco Plaza was working with pretty much just kids, right?
Yeah.
There were a handful of adults, but it was really just children here, right? They pretty much carry this movie, right? So is there anyone who stands out as a notable performance, either good or bad? And what did you think overall about the acting, Andy?
Well, this was what's her name? The Veronica character. I can't. What's her name?
Sandra
Right.
Ascasena.
This is the
Mhm.
first time that she actually starred in a film,
Yeah.
and she did an amazing job. She definitely stood out. Also Antonito, the little boy.
Yeah.
To me, that kid stole the show as something sweet and pure and something so scary. The turning point for me at the end of the movie when she told her son, look, told her, sorry, her brother, cover your eyes, and cover your ears, keep your eyes closed, and don't look, because and then she's standing in front of him, and obviously what he sees is not his sister, you know.
Right.
That to me was just like, wow, in a film that has so much that can be called unoriginal, that was extremely original, and that's something that I love. So not just the lead, but Antonito was amazing. I really love that. I really love that kid. I did.
Also, like, has a more adorable kid like ever
Yeah,
been cast in
in a horror
anything?
movie.
Real.
like,
Yes.
like that kid was a literal angel. Like that was a cherub cast in a movie. Yeah, no, I agree. Like, yes, this was her first starring role. She was 16. I mean, when this
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
out, playing a 15-year-old. So,
Mhm.
back to that sleepaway camp thing of,
Mhm.
casting somebody who's the
Mhm.
right age, and yet a lot can go wrong with that, and especially with it being her first role, and
But
they were like,
if you
carry it.
notice, if you notice, she was on. She was in the film the entire time. There was not one scene where she was not in the film.
Right.
Yeah.
She carried the movie. You know.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a lot. That's a lot of weight. Like, look, 16-year-old me just barely figured out how to work at Chick-fil-A, right? So I was definitely not carrying any movies. I was like, wait, so like I batter it, then I fry it, or so,
At what point do we put the hate in the chicken?
yeah, exactly. So wait, now, like, do I say a slur when I hand it to them, or do I wait till I go into the back? And so, oh, Chick-fil-A. And so there's a lot there. The kids all did exactly what they needed to do, which was be great at being kids.
Mhm.
And you're right, and Antonito had some great scenes.
Mhm.
But the twins, they didn't, but it was through no fault of their own. They weren't as big a part of the story. So being there and just being cogs in the machine is what they needed, and those kids pulled that off.
Right.
We talked about Sister Death, and the blind nun. That role
Yeah.
was awesome, and I loved how. So the idea of the wise old blind person, right? Tale as old as time. But what we got out of Sister Death was wise old blind person who don't fucking care. And that was great, right? It's like, no, I sneak down to the basement and I smoke. You fucked up. And I'm not going to tell you how to fix it. I don't give a shit. I blinded myself to fix this.
And she gives
Figure
her
it
no
out.
no hope, man.
No.
Like none at all.
No.
She's just like,
No hope.
protect your brother and sister because
Yeah.
they gonna need them.
And then on top of giving her no hope, then she gives the audience a quick reminder of how little hope was she gives her when she puts out her cigarette. She's like, yeah, just run. And it's like, whoa, right? Like it was fun to have the wise old character not be sage-like. She wasn't there to pass down the wisdom. Yeah, well, she was like, yeah, I see it. Blinded myself. Still happens. Life's a bitch, and then you die.
It reminded me of that episode in The Empire Strikes Back when Yoda's asking Luke Skywalker if he's afraid to begin his training, and Luke's like, "I'm not afraid." He goes, "Oh, you will be."
Yeah,
You will
exactly.
be.
And so, like So that those moments in the basement, or I guess they're, really that one particular moment with she was cemented as such a great character, not only for this movie, but she's a memorable character in horror as a whole.
Right.
We talk about the pieces of this movie that are interchangeable with other horror films. Like Sister Death is the standout here. She's the character who exists in this movie and is a keystone of this. Like
she would have been played by Lynn Shay in an American movie.
Yes, she would have. Absolutely. And so she ended up being, everybody played their roles very, very well. And, so credit to the kids who pulled it off, and credit for Paco Plaza for pulling it together.
For me, I all the characters you've brought up are complete standouts. I think to a smaller degree, only because their roles were smaller. The actress who played Lucia, Bruna Gonzalez, she was there was one scene after Verónica chokes her, where she's asking her, "Why were you choking me?" And it's like such a sweet scene between one sister and another. And then when you start to think about that scene afterwards, where like it was very clear that she was just flat out choking her sister, right? And yet what Verónica says is like, "I'm trying to protect you. I wasn't trying to choke you." You see, like, you start looking at that scene in a different way now, and you can see that process in Lucia's eyes, where she's like, "The fuck is going on here?
Right.
She's choking me. How can she be protecting me?" And yet she still falls in line, and she's still like, "Yeah, okay, I'm gonna trust you. You're my older sister," right? And she doesn't understand why she was doing it, but for whatever reason it was probably for her own for her own protection. Like I think that was a really great scene. It's just one little scene, right? But we do see that later in the movie when Verónica comes back, right, in the final showdown with the monster, which is really just a showdown with herself, right? Her the other twin, Irene, is the first one to pop up,
right,
when she's looking for the sisters, right? And she says, "Where's Lucia?" And Irene points at where Lucia is, and that's when Lucia pops up. Like Lucia is like fucking terrified of her because she was previously attacked. Like there's these little bits of like just good acting that goes on, even with the children. You were gonna say something, Dan?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say there's also an element, like once you realize that she actually was choking her and that it was all that, there's this element of realism that in hindsight you kind of chuckle about, but it makes so much sense. I know Dave and I are older siblings. I don't know about you, Andy.
I'm the youngest one.
Okay, well then maybe it happened to you. But when I was growing up with my younger brother, and I reached the age where I could watch him, and occasionally you'd do something you weren't supposed to do,
right.
Or you're roughhousing and shit gets too real and you hurt your sibling. So then you immediately, what would nowadays be referred to as gaslighting, you immediately try to, you're like, no, that's not how it happened. Remember? you immediately like, no, remember we were goofing and then this happened. And you're just hoping that they go, yeah, that's right.
You shouldn't have jerked your arm in that way.
Yeah, exactly. No, remember, like you tried to get away from me, but we were like wrapped up, shit like that. And so it's one of those things where when you think about that element of it, yeah, it's a little bit laughable, but then also it's like that's a super relatable thing, as like from a younger sibling who views their older sibling, who are willing to be like, maybe I don't remember it exactly how it happened, So there's a really deep level of realism to that moment, because you're right. Lucia was fully aware of the fact that Veronica was choking her, but she just says, "No, I wasn't." She's like, "All right, okay, cool, yeah. I guess not."
You just made me realize that there's probably a larger part of my childhood that I probably misconstrued or something.
So
Shiver, ruining childhood.
Exactly.
2016.
So there's a lot here with a great cast. And one thing that we always go back to when we talk about the cast is the director and the filmmaking. Now, Paco Plaza is no amateur when it comes to making scary movies. This is the guy who made all three of the Rec films that I've seen. I think they may have kept making them after he wasn't.
There was a fourth one that his co-director from the original directed.
Okay, there we go. And I mean, even before those, he made a movie called, let me make sure, okay, it's called Roma Santa. When I saw it, I believe it was just called Werewolf Hunter, because I saw like an American version of it. And it's also a pretty good movie I think it was made for like $12. But so this guy, he knows what he's doing. And so when you look at the aspects of this filmmaking, from what he got out of the cast to, just everything that's presented on the screen, what are the standouts here for you? What makes this movie? Because, it's interesting. We all open saying we like it, but then we still kind of manage to keep pointing out flaws in it. So what holds this movie together in a way that makes you feel comfortable saying that you like it?
I think that from right after the whole try to grab you with the police at the beginning, it starts at the end. But when the movie starts and she's taking care of her little brother and sisters, it seemed so natural to me. It seemed effortless. It made me realize that this guy could direct anything, and this film could have been anything if you would have just taken a look at the way that it started. I mean, it didn't necessarily have to be a horror movie from what it is that I saw, but it obviously is a horror movie. But the way that they were so natural, the way that they naturally acted like a family, and it wasn't forced, that to me stood out. And that's one of the reasons it made me care for the characters, a lot more. It didn't seem like, if you're watching, like, for example, Scream is a great film, but of course they're just overacting for a larger part of it. These characters were just, so even the little kids, they were naturally acting like brothers and sisters, and she was taking care of them the way that a big sister does. And that to me just like grabbed me from the get-go. And it pulled me in. It made me care for the characters as the story went on, despite whatever it is, whatever unoriginal ideas you might have taken from other places. It still made the characters matter to me throughout the entire film, and I never let that go.
Yeah, I know. I agree. There are some huge standout scenes from this movie that I think sell this in a lot of really good ways. My two favorites are, I love the scene where she's walking, listening to her music, and everything around her is happening in reverse. And like the people are walking backwards, and like conversations and stuff that are happening are happening. The audio, everything around her is happening backwards, down to the fact that she eventually walks past herself and then kind of whips around. And then we actually get like that, like reversing the record sound. And then we go forward with the other version of her. That scene, while it did nothing, it didn't, there was no story element that was progressed by that scene. But sometimes that's what makes something so great and so unsettling. Just having a standout scene like that, I thought that was incredible. And I really loved it was almost corny, but I loved when she was walking and she started, and the ground became the pages of the book that she was reading.
Right.
That was so cool, because we're sitting there and she's just repeating those couple of things over and over again while she's reading. And then we're watching her literally walk across the pages.
It was almost like traveling by map.
Yes. I mean, it was a really well done scene. And so some things like that, I think, are the standouts where, like we keep saying, you can look at a movie that's not wholly original, but that you can enjoy it and have some moments that really stood out to you.
I know that you guys probably want to talk about this, but I'm just going to bring it up. The music was so damn original in this film. I mean, and that to me set it apart too. And they put in weird things, like in the scene where she's walking through the apartment, and she's noticing the shadow behind the whatchamacallit, the through the curtains and through the glass, and you really can't tell what it is. But if you listen to the music, it's like old 90s cop music from old television shows. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't
Well,
have
it's
it doesn't
going
have
along with what the TV is playing.
exactly, and it's so
brilliant
weird. It's
use
good.
of diegetic music.
Right, and it's good, and they do that throughout the film, and then of course the other thing is what's the name of that band?
Heroes de
Heroes de
Silencio.
Right.
Silencio.
I mean, she's wearing the shirt. It's on the wall. They play it here and there. I mean, it really does it really does a good job with with the sound, with the music. I mean, there where there isn't supposed to be any music, where it's just blank, it's perfect, and even the eclectic collection of music that they put in the film is just amazing. At first I was thinking, well, why the hell are they doing that? But then you think about it, it's like, oh, this is perfect. This is really good.
I think that one of the things that was absolutely nailed is an authentic look at the 90s. Because it's very, very easy to fall into that Stranger Things nostalgic look at a period, right? This is done with the 80s and 90s all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that what we got here was an incredibly authentic view of that, where when I think back on my childhood, I think of wearing cheap Casio watches, playing the same cassettes over and over again on my Sony Walkman, right? And these were ever present in the movie, right? The kinds of jeans and the cuts of those jeans, the t-shirts that were just a little too baggy, the posters that were hanging all over the walls. Like, this is how a young person in the 90s, their sense of decor, right? That's what it was, and she had a just slightly goth or slightly punk look to her without going overboard and making her an extra in the craft, right?
Yes.
Which we've talked about before,
Yeah.
right? So to me, that was one of those things that Paco Plaza absolutely nailed. Another one of the things that I think he nailed was his command of camera. I mean, is just absolutely perfect. There's some of those shots that reminded me of Candyman, where like they're like kind of like high up, and we see her just walking across various different open spaces. Those kind of shots where we see her looking back at Mara Muerte, and then Mara Muerte looking back at her. Those shots were gorgeous. There's one in particular where again, I go back to this idea that we were kind of force fed these religious images and then told, no, it doesn't matter. But the idea that we have the cross in the actual building that they're at, right? But it's an upside down cross, right? There's that one shot of the building, and it's a gorgeous shot, and it's framing across upside down. Oh, what a beautiful, beautiful shot. In the end, we find it means nothing, right? Because but and I feel like that is one of those issues that I had with the movie as well. We talked about this with the movie We Need to Do Something, right? Where there are a couple of really great scenes, really great shots, incredibly artistic, and then don't really add anything to the larger film. But artistic they are, and I think here they are a little bit more meaningful. Ultimately, you can kind of take what Mara Muerte says and say, well, she's maybe just a little too cynical, right? So who knows? Maybe I'm reaching.
And I think that another thing that definitely comes across when you look at how the film was made is the fact that Paco Plaza understands what is scary. He understands the idea of the jump scare, but he also understands the idea of the unsettling and the unnerving being scary. The scene where she's trying to eat and she's just like shaking and she eventually kind of throws up. And like that's like horrifying, right? Like this idea of losing control of your facilities, but then to also frame it from the perspective of the kids who are like, that was weird, you were shaking, and then you puked, right? Like there's a give and take there that he understands very, very well. The subtle scare when at one point when she's walking, the TV cuts on suddenly and she starts walking across towards it, and you just see a figure in the hallway, just kind of very quickly.
That was a great scene.
And you see it, and it's that moment that, God, I love that moment. We referenced him earlier, but Mike Flanagan is the king.
He's the master
that shot of the wait. Did I just see that? And then she shuts off the TV, and you get the great reflection in the TV of the creature behind her. Some of that stuff that's just unnerving and unsettling. There's a shot where they show this painting of some wolves chasing a deer,
right?
And then in the final scene, they show it again, but it's changed. The deer is gone, which then and it happens right before the reveal, which you then find out she is the demon. The demon isn't chasing her. And you realize it's one of those things where it's like right before they revealed it because now the wolves weren't chasing anything. It was just the wolves. We eventually find out she is the demon. It wasn't chasing her. It was in her the whole way. So little things like that.
Oh, that's great. I missed that.
Right. Yes, but the one thing, if you notice when they were taking her out on the gurney and they put a still on her shirt, and she had the wolf on her shirt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because she was the wolf. Yeah, right. She wasn't the deer being chased by the wolf. There was only the wolf. And so that
makes a whole lot more sense now.
Right, yeah.
and so that imagery, that type of stuff that you go back to, that can only be attributed to just amazing direction and having your idea for what you want to do and knowing what makes things scary. And like honestly, one of the things that was scariest to me in this film, so often I find an immense amount of terror in ominous dialogue and lines. And there was something that Sister Death said that was it was terrifying to me. And when she's talking about the Ouija board, she says, it's not who you want to talk to. What matters is who you talked to.
Yeah.
Right. And this concept of using a Ouija board and with there being no physical, what's the word I'm looking for? Like understanding, right? Like there's no checks and balances to a Ouija board. If you believe that a Ouija board is working outside of just this, automatic muscle movement thing, if you believe that a Ouija board is actually communicating through the veil, then the concept of not really knowing who you're talking to,
there's no guarantee,
right? And because it doesn't matter who you want to be talking to, all that matters is who you are. There is an amazing book out there. It is a very dense read. Like you pick it up and you think you're going to finish it quick. You will not. It's called Voices Through the Void or Voices from the Void by Hester Travers Smith. And this is like one of the most proclaimed talking spirit board users of all time. And she devotes an entire chapter to this concept of the fact that malevolent beings on the other side will essentially use your relatives or your loved ones or whoever you're trying to speak to as like skin suits, right? And then they will communicate to you through them to get their way. And so that particular line, it's one of those things where, I'm always at odds with myself about how spiritual I am, right? Like I'm not religious, but I find myself constantly at odds with how spiritual I am, because I do find myself as I read a lot of things, finding a lot of belief in things that are supernatural, or at least not complete, not just completely disregarding them. And so when you read that book, by the way, if you're I'm gonna give the exact same like disclaimer here that I gave when we were doing Hereditary. just because you believe fire isn't hot doesn't mean it won't burn you. Right. There's it's
Right.
if just because you don't believe that a Ouija board works doesn't mean that it can't. I'm not sitting here telling you Ouija boards work. I'm just telling you that simply thinking that because you don't believe in them, that nothing can happen to you is a fool's errand. And so if you're going to fuck with that type of stuff, educate yourself first. Don't just grab one that comes from a newsstand and a shot glass that you found in a basement and go to town.
Hey, there's an old Cuban thing that goes, I don't believe in Santeria, but I respect it.
There you go. Yeah. Exactly. A healthy respect for these things will take you a long way, because if they are real, they can very much fuck you up. And so that idea of it doesn't matter who you want to talk to, it's who you actually talk to, that I thought that set a very different tone for this movie, and I loved it.
Absolutely.
All right.
I agree. So that leaves us with only one more task, which is to actually rate this movie. And even though there are only 4 members in Héroes del Silencio, we're going to rate this out of a possible 5 Héroes del Silencio.
Because you, the fan, are the 5th.
You are the 5th. You are the 5th, right? You're never alone when you're walking with Hermana Muerte. So we'll start with you, Andy. Out of a possible 5 Héroes del Silencio, how many Héroes del Silencio do you give this?
I'm going to give it 4 Héroes del Silencio. And the reason is I was actually at a 3.5, but there are a lot of things that came out in this conversation that made me change my mind. I will say that the only reason that I'm not going higher than a 4 is because there are some things that were I've seen these things before. I mean, some things were, I mean, you're going to say it's a great film, it's a good movie. I mean, some of it isn't very original, but some parts of it are very original. But it's not completely original. That's the one thing. And the other thing that to me was the pacing of the film. You know, I found it dragging a little bit. You know, but you know, when it picked up towards so I want to say about maybe 45 minutes to the end of the film, I mean, it was just an excellent film, you know. So so for those 2 reasons, I'm going to give it a 4 and not a 3.5. For Héroes del Silencio. Héroes del Silencio.
There it is. So I'm gonna go. I'm gonna hit that 3.5 mark that you were looking at. There are a lot of really good things here. This is definitely a movie that I would recommend. But there are some flaws to this. The number one being that, like we just keep falling back on, there is a lack of originality to the overarching idea of the film. The command of what's scary, the great performances from the actors, those things are all done. You know what? No, I'm going 4. Changing horses midstream here. I am going to go 4 because I would recommend this, and there are far more good takeaways than bad. So I'm going to dock that 1 star just for that one Héroes de Silencio. I am gonna sit on that 4 because I just talked myself into it. But there's a lot of good stuff here, but I definitely think this is a big recommend. And you know, sometimes as horror fans, when something doesn't scare us, we forget that this could be genuinely terrifying to somebody who doesn't seek these things out. Right. And I do think that if you have not seen all of the other films that we keep referencing, that there is a lot of really great elements here that make this a definite recommend. And it even slides into that category of recommending to just about anybody. Honestly, the only people I'm not going to recommend this to are those handful of people like my dad love you, Dad, but you're a jackass when it comes to this. I don't read. I watch movies so I don't have to read. Okay, fine. I'm not going to tell you to watch this one, right? But other than those people, this is a movie that I absolutely will recommend because there's a lot of there are some great scares here. There are some things that are unsettling. There are some great performances. So yeah, like I said, talk myself into it, but I am going to hit that 4 mark with this one.
So I was also sitting at a 3.5. Héroes del Silencio previously. And I kept waffling back and forth because I was like, okay, so is 3.5 too low? Is 4 too high? I knew I wanted to be somewhere in there, but we don't do 0.75s and 0.25s. We don't math that hard.
Right. That's a lot of math.
All right. Yeah, that's a nerd's game. All right. So I think I'm gonna go 4. Okay. Number 1, to make the math real easy, right? But number 2, because I think when a movie has some flaws, but not an overwhelming number of flaws, you can either choose to overlook them or you can choose to let those flaws define the movie. This is a case where I think that I can choose to overlook the flaws that this movie has because the movie is a rather enjoyable watch. It's one that I can definitely look at and say, you know what, it's not perfect. And it is far from perfect. Right. But there's there's a lot of really great stuff here. There's I don't think that it's scary. I think that the movie, rated against itself is actually quite good and just scary enough. It's when you start comparing it to other things, which we've said we shouldn't do, right? That is the kind of thing that, it's like what I don't want to compare this to Ouija Origin of Evil.
Right.
I don't want to compare this to Conjuring 2. I don't want to compare this to The Exorcist.
That's exactly why I ended up giving it that other half.
When I do, then it is a 3.5, but against itself, and not its marketing campaign. Mm-hmm. I think that this is a solid 4. This is one that I would recommend to just about anyone who can get, as was famously said, get over that 1-inch barrier, and just read, So there you have it. 4, a solid 4. 4s all the way around. Just to make the math easy.
There we go.
But also because it deserves it, right? So we have a 4 for Verónica, right? And next week we will be concluding our Valentine's month, romance month special episodes with which movie, Daniel?
We are going to go back. We're going to go way back. We're going to go back to, I believe, the 40s?
Further back, sir.
Oh, further back than the 40s.
I believe it is. The year is 1935. Jump into your way back machine.
We're gonna
and travel back to the time when there was no choice but to watch it in black and white.
Exactly. We are going to be watching The Bride of Frankenstein. Wow. We're going way back. We're gonna delve into the land that Dave has been waiting forever for us to get into, and we are going to do The Bride of Frankenstein. We're gonna go Universal horror monster movie with this, and we're going way back. So we are going to conclude with perhaps the first, romantic horror movie. We're gonna go back to the days. What do people always say? The days when men were men and golems just wanted to bang. So we're gonna be doing The Bride of Frankenstein, and it's gonna be my first watch. I've seen a handful of these Universal monster movies. I've seen The Invisible Man. I've seen Creature from the Black Lagoon. I've never seen this one. I'm very excited. So,
yeah.
So make sure you tune in next week. We're going to be doing The Bride of Frankenstein to wrap up our month of love, as February ended up becoming. If you've enjoyed the show, make sure you follow us on all of our social media at Shiver Pod. We always try to release a day or two in advance and let you know what movie we're going to be watching, so you have a chance to watch it and join in. If you're listening, why aren't you watching live? We're every Monday at 9/8 Central. We'd love to have you in. I believe we have a listener over here named Ralph. But I'm getting everything in private chat, not comments.
So here's the thing.
So I don't know how he's pulling that off.
This is Ralph Diaz, who was with us on Mandy.
Oh, okay.
And I was telling him what he always asks what it is that we're going to be doing. And he says, I don't know how I'm doing this either.
So thank you for listening,
He's
Rob.
a home intruder.
Yeah.
It's suddenly the strangers. So I gave him the link that I gave you, Daniel, and you, Andy, and not realizing that I was giving him the link to.
So he's in the group.
Oh, there you go. Right.
And because he had access earlier, he still has access.
So he's just chilling in the green room, watching from there. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, Rob.
He's just backstage having a good time.
He wants everybody to know it was Dave's mistake, not his. Cool. So, but like Ralph, like Andy is most weeks. Like I know a couple people out there are. We appreciate everybody who watches live. Make sure you comment. And if you like the show, you can check us out at shiverpod.com. That will take you to our geekbro.net page, where you'll find not only our podcast, but everything that's on the Geek Bro Network. We got a little bit of everything. Dave and I do Mount Geek More. We've got What's Up, Bro? Crimacopia, our sister podcast. The flip side, we delved into their territory a little bit today by going into the true crime, but they stick with like true crime, whereas we were like, this is supernatural, maybe crime. You've got Comedy Fitness, A Dose of Ellie, Seasons, a TV podcast, Kick Flicks. There's a little bit of everything on there. We just ingest as much media as we can over here at geekbro.net and then get on the internet once or twice a week and just spew it all back at you. So make sure you head to geekbro.net where you can check out all those podcasts. And don't forget, on Apple and on Spotify, you can rate. So if you enjoy the show, toss us a 4 or 5 star rating. Let the world know. Move us up on that algorithm.
Absolutely. We really appreciate all those reviews on YouTube. Go ahead and as I absolutely hate to say, like and subscribe and hit the little bell icon so that you can be notified when we go live. And we go live every Wednesday at 8 Eastern, 8 Central, 9 Eastern.
Yes, 9 Eastern, 8 Central.
Yeah, I said that backwards.
It happened.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I watched Cartoon Network. I feel like they always stay on Cartoon Network, right? Toonami and all that. So on behalf of all of us here on Shiver, Fried Shiver.